Bim. Folks, Nicholas Under here, video number 16. I'm going to be talking about mental health underwriting in this video and whether or not you can get cover when you have adverse mental health history. Why should you listen to me? I've been working in life insurance and personal finance for the past 7 years. I have advised on literally thousands of these policies. So hopefully I can impart some of that knowledge onto yourselves and help you avoid some of the pitfalls that people run into typically when they're looking at these sort of insurances. Now, in this video, I'll talk a bit about the underwriting process, how it pertains to mental health, some of the outcomes that you can expect if you apply for cover. That should pretty much be it. So, let's talk about the underwriting process generally here. So, if you apply for a policy, a personal risk insurance policy, so that might be life insurance, total and permanent disability insurance, trauma insurance, income protection, the insurer is going to assess you based on your health and lifestyle. Okay? So when it comes to health or medical history, they're going to look at your medical history and decide whether or not they have to make changes to the standard terms that they offer, what we usually refer to as standard rates. So if you have a perfect medical history, then you'll get the standard rate offer. Now, if you do have some sort of adverse medical history, the way they manage this is by offering you revised terms. Okay, these revised terms may include exclusions, where they exclude the condition you've had in the past because you're more likely to have that condition again in the future. And they use loadings where it's harder to isolate your medical history and exclude it from the policy. So instead of excluding it, they charge you more because you're perceived a higher risk of claiming. So a couple of examples of exclusions and loadings. Lower back pain, a very common condition that can be excluded. So if you have had a history of lower back pain and you see the chiropractor regularly, for example, and you apply for income protection, the insurer is likely to exclude lower back from your policy. Okay, so you can claim for any sickness or injury that you may have that stops you from being able to work with the exclusion of your lower back. Okay, so that's exclusions. An example of something that's common that often gets a loading is something like diabetes. So diabetes, you're probably not going to miss work because of diabetes, but the things that are downstream of diabetes, like tingling fingers and toes or kidney issues, eyesight issues. So instead of applying an exclusion to diabetes, a loading will be used. The insurer will charge you more if you take out the policy. So that's basically how they manage that perceived extra risk that you may carry because of your medical history. All right, now, when we talk about mental health, there's a few factors, key factors that insurers will want to know about. Okay, if you've had some sort of adverse mental health history, they're going to want to know what were you diagnosed with, obviously. When were you diagnosed, or when did you first have symptoms? How long have you had symptoms for? Has it been on more than one occasion? And if you have recovered, how long have you been symptom and treatment free? In the more serious cases, have you been hospitalized? Have you had suicide attempts or suicidal ideation? Okay, so these are kind of factors they'll be interested in, and wherever you sit in regards to those factors is going to determine the outcome that you get. Okay, cool. So to help me kind of talk about this and visualize it a little bit easier, I created this simple matrix here, 3x3 matrix. So basically in each row, I'll put this on the screen, but you can see the first row, you've got depression, anxiety, stress. Okay. Second row, PTSD, bipolar. Third row, schizophrenia. And that's kind of moving down in how common they are and the severity. So that's the rows. In the columns, you've got the condition in the past, maybe one episode, but you're symptom-free currently. Now you've got ongoing in the second column, ongoing symptoms, but relatively mild. Third column, ongoing, but more serious. All right. So that's how it's laid out. Okay, so talking about depression, anxiety, and stress to begin with. So if you've had an episode in the past, but you've been symptom and treatment free for a couple of years at least, you are likely to get the standard rate for income protection and the standard rate for life insurance. All right, no changes. You would likely get the same terms that someone with a perfect medical history would get. By the way, really quickly, I'm going to be talking about income protection and life insurance, but the outcomes for income protection are going to be generally pretty similar for total and permanent disability insurance, and the outcomes for life insurance they can be similar to trauma. Trauma insurance, you can get exclusions on, whereas life insurance, it's typically just loadings, but it'll give you a rough idea at the very least of what to expect. Okay, cool. So the second column, ongoing illness, but it's mild, okay? So this is going to be like someone who's maybe had a depressive episode, a period in life where things weren't going that great. They got treatment for a few months to a year, and then they were okay, and they've been this is ongoing. So then they were relatively okay, but let's say they stayed on the medication and they're just taking medication to manage it. If they get a flare up, they go and see the psychologist, no problem. No history of suicide attempts, no hospitalizations. Okay, this is quite common. Being medicated for depression, anxiety, maybe even stress. In this situation, income protection, your mental health is going to be excluded from the policy. You can claim for any sickness or injury that stops you from being able to work, except for mental health illnesses. And it's a blanket mental health exclusion. All right? They don't just exclude your depression or your anxiety. They exclude all mental health. With life insurance, in this scenario, you're going to get the standard rate, okay? If you haven't had any history of suicidal ideation or attempts, there's no perceived additional risk on you dying, so you get the standard rate, the same as anyone else with a perfect medical history would get. Okay. Third column, ongoing but more serious. Okay, so this is where with income protection, you at the very least an exclusion, possibly a loading, and if it's bad enough, you can get declined. With life insurance, you're going to get a loading, and if it's bad enough, you can get a decline. Life insurance loadings can get quite high, 200, 300%, but eventually they will decline you completely. They won't just keep increasing the loading. So that's depression, anxiety, and stress. Okay, second row you've got here is PTSD and bipolar. Should also mention this is obviously not an exhaustive list. This is exhaustive list. This is just what I used to run into most frequently when I was giving advice on these sort of policies. So PTSD, bipolar. This is a little bit more trickier with getting cover. Okay, if it's something from the past, you've been symptom and treatment free for a while, few years, give or take, depending on the insurer's underwriting guidelines, you can get away with income protection with just an exclusion. Okay? In life insurance, you're probably going to get a loading. So even if you have been symptom and treatment free for years, you're probably still going to get a loading on your life insurance. 50% is the smallest loading, and then they go up from there. So meaning you would have to pay 50% more, roughly, than that person who had the perfect medical history and got the standard rate. Now, moving on to the second column, if you've got ongoing symptoms, they're mild, but they're ongoing, then with your income protection, definitely an exclusion, possibly a loading, and the loadings can get higher and higher depending on the severity. Life insurance, your loading's going to get worse, going up from 50%. And like I said earlier, eventually, if the loading's too high, if the perceived risk around you and your medical history is too severe, then they'll eventually decline you. If you've got ongoing symptoms and it's relatively serious, you're most likely going to get declined. You're not going to be able to get covered in the case of PTSD and bipolar, unfortunately. All right, now the third row here is schizophrenia. Okay, always hard to get covered with schizophrenia. Only the most mild of mild cases would be able to consider getting cover. It's going to be a case-by-case basis. We didn't see a whole lot. Well, I didn't see a whole lot of these sort of clients presenting with this sort of history. So can't comment on it in too much depth, but it is definitely tricky to get cover if you've got history of schizophrenia. Okay, so that should give you a bit of insight into what kind of outcome you would get. You can have a think about, what's my history like? What cover do I want to get? And you've got a really rough idea of what kind of exclusions or loadings you might end up with. If you want to get a clearer idea, what you can do is approach an advisor, insurance advisor or financial advisor, and they can go and do what's called a pre-assessment. So all those factors that I told you earlier, what you were diagnosed with, when, how long you've had symptoms for, how many episodes you've had, have you been hospitalized, what's your treatment, medication, counseling. You provide all that information to the advisor. They'll go and run it past a few different insurers and see which ones are going to give you the best outcome. And if you can provide all those informations that I just mentioned, you'll be able to get a pretty accurate outcome. So definitely recommend doing that. But yeah, look, that's pretty much it. So yeah, in summary, basically, depression, stress, anxiety, you can get the standard rate if you haven't had symptoms for a while. If it's bad enough, you can get completely declined. And it just gets harder and harder for PTSD, bipolar, schizophrenia, as mentioned. Get a pre-assessment done. That's the best way to find out what you're going to be eligible for. It's anonymous as well, I should have mentioned. That's pretty much it, guys. So hopefully that's helpful.